Wow, it's episode 300. Somehow we've got here, so we better make it a good one. And we are. It's not a self-indulgent podcast. We are going to deliver value. We've got the 5 biggest things we've learned on our journey and the 5 biggest things you should have learned too.
Hello and welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning, property investors like you come together to be informed and inspired, and have been now, Rob, for 300 episodes.
Yeah, this is a really special milestone, and I'm really looking forward to today's episode because of that. I think we're going to deliver a good episode today, Rob. We're in a good mood, and rightly so, because it's not just 300 podcasts, it's actually 300 property podcasts every single week, never missing a week, ever. They've gone out on Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and that's something that we're definitely proud of. But it's not a chore, not at all. Like, the Property Podcast is part of our lives now. It feels weird if we don't have a recording session, so we record a couple in advance and then we have a week off. It feels really, really strange.
Yeah, so a big thank you to you for listening, whether this is your first episode or your 300th episode. And yes, I do believe there are some people who've gone back to the very beginning and listened to all of them. But however many episodes you've listened to, thank you. And please keep doing so, because that means that we can keep doing it, and we absolutely love it. So today we're going to be sharing the most valuable things that we've learned from doing this for 300 weeks in a row, and some things that we hope that you've learned as well. But before that, why break with tradition?
Yes, as always, we start with a news story. And this week's news story comes from Letting Agent Today. And the headline says, revealed where to find the highest buy-to-let rental yields. Well, if you've been scouring the internet and doing your research to find where the best yields are, relax. This article's got you covered, because the Free Credit Report Company have surveyed over 580,000 properties, apparently, and they've come up with this information that Nottingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and the North West boast some of the UK's highest rental yields.
Yeah, the interpretation that they've gone with in the story is that it's cities with a high student population. I prefer to view it as the Rob and Rob effect, because Nottingham, where I've lived in the past, has got 2 postcodes up there, and Liverpool, Rob B's birthplace, has got 2 up there as well. So you can read into those reasons whatever you like. I know what I'm going to do. But those 2 locations are certainly looking strong. If you listened to our webinar a couple of weeks back, you will know that those are places that we've got our eye on for next year. And in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be talking about other areas that we're tipping for 2019. So make sure you listen out for that one.
So when you've done 300 weeks of podcasting, you learn a few things. And we've learned a lot. This podcast could be 50 things we've learned since we started, because the lessons just keep coming. And I do not expect that trend to stop. But what we've done today is picked out 5 real big lessons that we've taken from our time doing the podcast.
Okay, so the first of our lessons, and I think this is a really, really important one, and something we've fallen victim to a few times in the past, Rob, and that's going too early with our predictions.
Yes, this is one of the biggest for me, because it's not just you making a prediction. Our investment follows the predictions. We don't predict one thing and then invest somewhere completely different. So this has also had a monetary cost for me as well. One of the big predictions we made was that London was going to grind to a halt and the property market was going to suffer. And it did, but we went way too early. And you could argue probably a couple of years too early with that prediction. So although we were right, being right costs money, because London did very well for those last 2 years. Now you could say, well, you were right, so what? But it's not like London's crashed since. London's just plateaued, may have dipped a little, but even if we'd just gone in for those 2 years, we would have made some significant money. And we've been too early predicting areas as well. Hull, for example. Many episodes ago, I tipped Hull as an area to look out for. And I still think, Hull at some point is going to see capital growth. But actually, it was way, way too early. There were other places that had to go first, like Manchester and Birmingham. Now, if you've listened to the podcast for the last couple of years, you'd think, wait a minute, the Robs normally seem right with their predictions. And we are now a lot more accurate with our predictions, but it's because we've learnt this lesson.
Yeah, we became conscious of this before we recorded last year's predictions episode, and we did rein ourselves in for that one, and we're going to be reviewing how we got on in a couple of weeks, so we'll see how accurate that was. But it definitely feels like we're on a better track, because we're conscious that just because we're seeing the stars aligning for a certain outcome doesn't mean it's going to happen soon. I think both of us have a tendency to live in the future a little bit and to be always looking ahead to the next thing, the next change, the next achievement or whatever it is, and not thinking enough about the present. And that's a very useful trait in some ways. But it also means that I think we can sometimes anticipate things happening more quickly than they really are. And London is a great example of this. The logic was there, but we were just way too early on it. And being early is basically the same as being wrong in many ways. And it's cost us money by doing that. So it's a shame we had to record 250 odd podcasts before cracking that one. But it is a very important lesson that we've learned that we probably wouldn't have done if we hadn't been having to publicly talk about this kind of thing every week.
Second on our list is switching strategy. Now, a few weeks ago, we had a podcast on this very subject, and we looked at Rob D's expensive mistake. Because the potential numbers of getting this wrong are so high, I think it's really important that it makes our top 5 list. And switching strategy, Rob, is something, Rob, that you in particular have taken away as a big learning point over the last few years.
Definitely. Being aware of which strategy you should be pursuing is very important, but so is recognising that things don't stay static. So go back and listen to that episode, because I think that gives a very clear example of the negative effects that can have and how easily it can come about if you're not aware to it. And again, I think that's something that we become aware of because we've been thinking about this stuff every week. A broader point that you can take out of that, which links into something else that I think we've learned, is that nothing is ever absolute when it comes to property. Nothing's black and white, and things change. Just because something is the case now doesn't mean that it will always be. So something else that we've learned is that something that we said back in the early episodes, which was never sell a property, is oversimplistic. The general principle, I think, is sound. If you hold on to a property over the long term, you will expect it to go up in value despite what happens along the way in terms of booms and crashes, and you'll get paid for owning that property. And if you've got debt against that property, as long as there's inflation, that debt will be eroded. So why would you sell a property? In general, that makes sense, but there are situations where you might want to. There are, for example, people who do very well from getting into areas early, reaping the benefits of the early growth and then getting out before the peak and doing that repeatedly. That's a difficult thing to do in property. It takes a lot of skill and a lot of thought, but it is a valid strategy. You also get properties that you buy for the long term that just aren't performing. And if those properties are never going to perform, why would you keep hold of them? And there might also be properties in areas that have had phenomenal growth where you can't remortgage, so you've got loads of equity in that property and it would be better deployed elsewhere. They're just 3 examples of situations where you might want to sell a property. So while the majority of the time hanging on to properties is a good thing to do, the statement never sell a property is really too absolute.
It is, but unfortunately, the next statement and our 4th lesson does feel a bit absolute, which is the standards are low everywhere in property. Property in general seems to attract a lot of the wrong people. And also there's an acceptance that you don't have to deliver a good service. And people just tolerate it because we have to. From every angle of property or property investment, it feels difficult at times. Conveyancing is slow and often painful. The service that you get from solicitors in most cases seems pretty awful. We've worked on hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions during the life cycle of the podcast, and we've been through so many solicitors. We think we've got some good ones now, which is great, but it's taken us 300 episodes to get this far. Same with mortgage advisors. The amount that we've worked with or tried working with, who just tell you things can't be done or promise big and delivery is small. The list goes on. We could rant about every area of property and talk about how low standards are for quite a while. And don't worry, we won't go on that rant, but it's something that we've learned that it's almost something that we've learned to accept because it is so bad. We've been able to build businesses in the background, really with the USP of delivering good service and doing the right thing. That shouldn't really be a USP. Good service and doing the right thing should be just part of every business's philosophy. But in property, that seems to make you unique. Now, we're not saying we're the only businesses that do the right thing and offer good service in property. Businesses that do that, or people who deliver service in property that do that, seem few and far between. And Rob, although I've learnt it, it still amazes me.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that it's going to change, but I'm certainly not going to go too early with that prediction. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But I'm hopeful that the general drive that we're seeing in other sectors to customer service improving and that being a real selling point, it will come to property eventually. It has to. But at the moment, it is pretty awful. I mean, even with our own businesses, there's been times when we haven't done as good a job as we should have done. But even just being honest about that and apologising for it and trying to fix it, that alone seems pretty unique. So standards are low. And that's something that we've learnt by being involved in lots of transactions ourselves, but also from all the messages that we receive from listeners. So many emails from people saying, my solicitor's done this, what should I do? My broker won't do that, what should I do? If it were just you on your own, you might think that you'd been unlucky or you were working with the wrong people. But no, take it from us, you're not alone. This is, sadly, at the moment, normal.
What isn't normal, Rob, is getting up very early on a Monday and recording a podcast week after week. But as I've said previously, it's not a chore, it's something we really enjoy. But while hopefully we've delivered lots and lots of value, hours upon hours of content, giving away all our knowledge, no secrets, holding nothing back, you would think, okay, that's one-way traffic, we're just giving. But we've got so much back in return.
Yeah, when you get nice emails or we see the iTunes reviews and people are thanking us and they're really grateful for the podcast, I almost feel guilty because I really feel like we've got more out of it than anyone else has in terms of bringing on our own knowledge, in terms of the people we've met, the opportunities that have come to us, and just the enjoyment for getting to talk every week to a friend about a topic that you're really interested in and having a great discussion, then having other people chip in on that discussion. It's absolutely fantastic. I genuinely feel that everybody wins when knowledge is shared, but we win more than most people think.
We do. So if we could write you all a 5-star review, we would. But thank you so much. And it's genuine. We absolutely love the podcast and we love helping people, but we've really benefited as well. So thank you for supporting the show. We want to make sure that if you've been listening for the last 300 episodes, or as Rob said earlier on, if it's your first episode, you take away some value. Again, we want to give more. So we're going to give you the 5 big lessons that we hope you've taken over the last 300 podcasts. Now, you'll want to go to the show notes this week because there's going to be links to every one of these lessons in different forms of content. So we'll link you back to courses or podcasts when appropriate. So go to thepropertyhub.net/episode 300. So nice and simple, go to thepropertyhub.net/episode 300 and make sure you go and check out all these links, because if you haven't learned these lessons yet, you need to, because these are the biggies.
Okay, the first lesson is the importance of goals. If you have been listening to all 300 episodes, you're probably sick of us talking about goals by now. We first talked about it back in episode 15. We're going to link to that one in the show notes, and we haven't stopped since then. There's a good reason for that. It is critical. Without knowing what your goal is, you can't work back from that and put a plan together and make progress. It's absolutely fundamental. It's nothing specifically to do with property. It applies to anything in life. But because with property, there's so many different ways to go with it and the stakes are so high, it just makes it even more critical that you have that at the base of everything that you do.
Next on our list is a subject that seems very closely linked with Rob and I now, which is the 18-year property cycle. We've been really big promoters of the 18-year property cycle because from all our research and reading, it works. Now, if you've not heard of the 18-year property cycle, we're not going to break it down now. But what it does do is it helps you understand where we are in a market cycle, where we've been, and just as, if not most importantly of all, where we're going. By knowing where the property market is heading, it allows you to make better investment decisions. So we did a two-parter podcast on this. Which again will be all linked to in the show notes. There's a course as well on this subject, so make sure you check out that. But it's really important as a property investor to have a baseline understanding of economics, and the 18-year property cycle is reasonably easy for anybody to pick up. So check out the podcasts, check out the video course as well, and make sure you have a basic understanding of it so you can invest a little more wisely.
The third thing that we hope you've learned is the importance of location, and with specific reference to the north-south divide. That's something that we've talked about a few times on the podcast. In the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/episode 300, you'll find links to a couple of those. But the key takeaway is that location matters. Not all areas are equal at each different point in the cycle. So the default of just investing near where you live, which is what most people do, might work given a combination of where we are in the cycle and what your personal goals are. or it might not. Being open to investing elsewhere is something that we've talked about a lot. There was a time when the general rule was growth in the south, yield in the north. That's changed over the 300 episodes. So now you're getting your growth and your yield in the north, and it will change again. But the important thing is that understanding of how the factors come together and the openness to investing where it makes the most sense, not just wherever's the most convenient.
Next on our list is getting expert advice. It's great that you can access so much information now for free, and we do our best to provide it, but work with experts. Rob and I still do. We still work with solicitors to do all conveyancing, and rightly so. We still work with mortgage brokers, even though our knowledge is probably better than a lot of mortgage brokers out there, unfortunately. But still, we work with the best experts we can find when it comes to mortgages. For us, because we're hands-off, we use letting agents, our own, OBS, and we will continue to, because you can't be an expert in everything. You can have great general knowledge, and I'd like to think Rob and I, when it comes to property, do have great general knowledge, and we can advise on many things. Another big one is tax. The tax landscape is changing all the time now, and that's why we set up Property Hub Tax. Whether you work with us or someone else, just work with an expert. It's dangerous if you've got a little bit of knowledge and you think you can save a few pounds by not working with experts. Experience shows us that actually, in many cases, people end up costing themselves money because they've not worked with an expert.
And the final thing that I hope you've learned is that there's an enormous amount that you can learn about property for free. Now, we do our best to put out as much of that as we can through the podcast and the forum and the meetups and a couple of not free but very cheap things as well, like books and the magazine. But it goes broader than that as well. There's so much out there on the internet, and there are so many people who are happy to share their knowledge just because it's a subject that they love. When we started the podcast, we wanted to talk about a subject that we loved, and there are so many people who will happily do the same. I don't know why it's the case, but it really feels like, compared with other industries that I've had exposure to, property is one where knowledge is not hoarded, and I think people are so enthusiastic about it that they're just really happy to talk about what they know. Learning this lesson is really important because it means that once you know what's out there and that there is all this information and people are happy to talk, you can go out there and you can find it. And it also means that you don't have to pay huge amounts of money for things that you don't really need to pay for. It's not the case that £1,000 course is going to be 100 times more valuable than a £10 book. There are benefits to paying larger sums of money for things in property, but you don't have to. The point is that there are no big secrets. There's nothing that's being held back from you that will magically be revealed if you hand over large amounts of money. And the final thing, Rob, that I think is absolutely critical is that, yes, that education is out there. Yes, you can spend your entire life learning about property and you can learn more and more and more, but you've got to do something with it.
You have to take action. There's so much out there, but the biggest lessons happen when you actually do it. Now, if you're thinking, oh, but I need to learn a little bit more before I go ahead, chances are that if you've listened to the podcasts and you've read a book or two, you're probably ahead of most people from when they started. When I started, I didn't have any podcasts to listen to. They didn't exist, but I still took action. And that's key, because it's the action and it's the lessons from that action that have allowed Rob and I to talk on the Property Podcast. It's not because we've read loads of research papers. It's because we've taken action. We've built portfolios. We've helped other people build portfolios. We've managed properties. We've helped other people manage properties. It's all that experience that helps us pass on the lessons. But we're still here. And it's not because we're phenomenal. We're pretty average. But it's our experience that is above average because we've done it for so long now. But your experience will only start when you take action. So we're coming to the end of the year now. If you haven't taken action yet, then force yourself to do it. And don't just say 2019 is going to be my year. Say by the end of February or March in 2019 it's going to be my year. Because sitting on the sidelines, nothing exciting happens. The real fun happens when you take action. So it's time to share a couple of reviews, and we're going to read out 300 in celebration. No, we're not. We're going to stick to with the normal 2. You'll be pleased to hear. And those 2, like every week, are fantastic. So thank you to Sub101, who says, I've been interested in property for a long time, but thanks to this podcast, I've finally invested. I've been interested in property for a long time, but thanks to the podcast, I've finally invested. This podcast is my weekly motivation. The 2 Robs are easy to listen to and even make me chuckle. Thank you, Sub. And we've got an author in, Rob. No, not you. Steve Julian, who wrote the book House Share Hero, although he didn't plug his book in the review. So it's very nice of him to leave a genuine one, which says, I've listened to every podcast from day one, and the guys have been excellent. As a professional HMO landlord with over 100 renters, I'm amazed at how much I learn from Rob and Rob each week. Their knowledge, tips, and recommendations are second to none, and I make or save money each year from the nuggets of information they drop into their podcast. They are the really good guys of property, and they've helped me retain my sanity over the recent hammering of landlords have been receiving. Great work, guys. Steve. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sub. Thank you to everyone who's supported the podcast over the last 300 episodes. And I'm sure if you're listening today, you've just accidentally forgot to leave a review, then I'm sure it'll be coming soon.
Now, just as I'm sure it's an oversight if you haven't left us a review yet, it's an even bigger oversight if you're not a Property Hub member. Because if you're not a Property Hub member, you won't receive the Hub Extra email on a Friday. And if you don't receive that email, then you'll miss out on the fact that we've curated the most valuable things from the whole week in terms of tools, education resources, what's going on socially, and more. And we've brought them all together into one really quick, scannable place for you. So we give you extra. We give you more than we can give you just on the podcast, and we make it really simple for you as well. If you're a Property Hub member, that will hit your inbox every Friday morning, bright and early, to send you into your weekend with lots of reading and listening and exploring to do.
And if you're thinking, well, wait there, I want my Hub Extra. Well, next week, don't you worry, because we've got a bumper episode for you. We're going to give you, like we do every year, a list of our favourite things, which will include books, apps, and more, so you've got loads to go at next week. And while you're waiting for that to happen, you've got Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. And if you can't wait till then, well, don't worry, we've got the social channels to keep you busy. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Property Hub UK. But thank you. 300 episodes in. We can honestly say it's a real privilege to do this podcast that seems somehow to rank really highly on iTunes every single week, that gets hundreds and hundreds of reviews. We don't take it for granted. We really do love what we do, and hope that you do too. So thank you to everyone who's supported us, whether you joined us on the first podcast or you've joined us recently. Thanks for getting behind it, and we can't wait to do the next 300. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.